I woke up and couldn't remember my first language. I woke up to my mom calling, and when she started speaking, I couldn't understand a single word. It sounded like gibberish. I kept saying, "What?" And she kept repeating herself until finally she switched to English and asked if I was feeling okay. I'd been fluent in Mandarin since birth and spoke it at home every single day. My parents had insisted on Mandarin only until I started school, and even then we used it exclusively in the house. But now it sounded like random noise with no meaning at all. Not even familiar noise like when you hear a language you recognize but don't speak. This was nothing. I tried to respond in Mandarin to tell her something was wrong, but my mouth couldn't form the words. I knew I should know them, but reaching for them was like grabbing at smoke. I tried to say simple things like hello or mom, but I couldn't remember how. My tongue felt clumsy and wrong, like I'd never made those sounds before. At work, I was supposed to lead a presentation for our Beijing clients who didn't speak English. I stood there in the conference room while they waited on the video call, and I couldn't read my own slides. The characters looked like abstract art with no meaning. My boss had to take over while I pretended to have a migraine, and the deal fell through because he couldn't answer their technical questions. I went to the emergency room thinking I'd had a stroke. The doctor ran tests and scans, but everything came back normal. She asked me to try writing in Mandarin, and I couldn't even hold the pen correctly for the strokes. She brought in a translator who spoke to me slowly and clearly, but it might as well have been ancient Sumerian. The translator said my blank stare was unsettling. My dad flew in from California because he didn't believe what my mom was telling him. He sat across from me speaking Mandarin for an hour straight while I just stared at him. He showed me children's books we'd read together when I was 3 years old, and I couldn't recognize a single character. He started crying, which I'd never seen him do before. The neurologist suggested it might be a rare form of aphasia, but that usually affects all languages, not just one. He said losing a single language completely while maintaining perfect fluency in another was technically impossible. The brain doesn't segregate languages that distinctly, especially when one was learned from birth. But here I was proving him wrong. My girlfriend Lynn only spoke Mandarin and a little broken English. We'd been together 3 years and always communicated in Mandarin. Now she'd talk to me and I'd just nod without understanding anything. She tried teaching me basic phrases like I was a child, but I couldn't retain any of it. After 2 weeks, she moved out and I never saw her again. I found my old journals from high school all written in Mandarin, and they were incomprehensible. Videos of myself from last month speaking fluently at my cousin's wedding seemed like they'd been dubbed by someone else. My entire WeChat history was meaningless symbols. 28 years of memories locked behind a language I no longer possessed. My grandmother only spoke Mandarin and had dementia. I was the only person who could calm her down during her episodes. Now when I visited, she'd get agitated because I couldn't respond properly. She kept asking what was wrong with me, and I couldn't explain. The nurses had to sedate her more frequently, and my family blamed me. The Language Institute tested me extensively and determined I had no recognition of Mandarin whatsoever. Not dormant or suppressed, but completely absent. Like I'd never been exposed to it at all. They wanted to study me but couldn't explain what had happened. One researcher said it was as if someone had deleted specific files from my brain. I tried learning Mandarin from scratch with apps and tutors, but it wouldn't stick. I'd practice a word for hours and forget it instantly. The sounds felt impossible to distinguish, like they were all the same noise. My job required bilingual skills, so they had to let me go. My parents started speaking English to me but kept slipping into Mandarin out of habit, then looking at me with disappointment when I didn't understand. Family gatherings became awkward because everyone had to translate everything. My young cousins laughed at me for not understanding cartoons. I went to 3 different specialists and they all said the same thing, that what happened to me was medically impossible. Languages don't just disappear overnight. The neural pathways should still exist even if damaged. But brain scans showed normal activity in all language centers when I heard English, and absolutely nothing when I heard Mandarin, like my brain didn't even recognize it as speech. 6 months later, I still couldn't understand a word of Mandarin despite thousands of hours of attempted relearning. Then I got a call from a researcher who'd heard about my case. She said she'd seen this once before in a patient 12 years ago. The patient had also lost their first language overnight with no medical explanation. When I asked what happened to that patient, she got quiet and said they'd stopped responding to follow-up calls after reporting something else. When I asked what she meant by something else, she said the patient claimed they'd started forgetting English too, but she hadn't believed them at the time. I hung up and realized I'd been staring at the word patient on my notepad for 30 seconds because it suddenly looked wrong. Full story on the channel below.